What is going on, everyone? Mets Talk with Hayden J here. I hope everyone is doing extremely well. It is that time of year again where we are summarizing the 2022 New York Mets season. We are going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly for the second half Mets. Obviously, in the first half in July, I did a summary of what I liked, what I didn't like, a little bit of a player analysis, and now we are going to be recapping the second half. So obviously starting off with all the way back into July when the Mets first played the Padres post All-Star break, and then obviously going into the last series of the season between the Mets and the Nationals, and obviously the wild card series on what went well and what went wrong for this New York Mets team. So this was a beyond fascinating season for the New York Mets. I mean, mind-boggling to think that many Met fans would be upset with the first round exit after winning 101 games and losing 61. This was a beyond interesting season where the Mets, in my opinion, went above and beyond with their expectations. This was a team that was projected by a lot of, companies like ESPN, like Fangraphs, to only win 95, 96 games. So obviously, they did exceed that by a couple of games. So, that can be a success. Obviously, at the end of the day, would you rather win some battles or would you rather win the war? And I think that's really what a lot of Mets fans really had in their mind of thinking. I think a lot of Mets fans were saying this is a team that is World Series or bust. And, I agree with that to the extent. But yeah, I mean, that aside, let's get into a little bit of a player analysis for the 2022 New York Mets. So obviously we're going to break this down by each position, then kind of just talked about what I like, what I didn't like, maybe a little bit about, the coaching staff, the managers, all of that great stuff. So obviously behind the plate, the Mets struggled with James McCann. Obviously, I don't want to specify James McCann because the Mets really didn't have a number one catcher for majority of the season. Obviously, James McCann only played a short sample size due to many of injuries, so he was sharing time with guys like Tomas Nido, like Patrick Mazeika, and for the last couple weeks, Francisco Alvarez. When it comes to the Mets catcher position, that is going to be in question this offseason and going into next season. But right now, obviously, as we could see, Tomas Nido definitely held down the fort. When it comes to James McCann, that's really a whole other question of, what do you do with his contract? Do you expire it? Do you, you use him out to Francisco Alvarez is ready to be the full-time catcher? That's a story for another day. Overall, James McCann, somewhat improved compared to last season. I know it is a short sample size. Obviously, defensively, he looked a little bit better. Offensively, still a nightmare. Tomas Nido honestly didn't do horrible. Defensively, he's a great defensive catcher. Offensively, not horrible. The catcher position between both of those guys really started to show some light in September. So, those are the games that really did count. Francisco Alvarez, really, really small sample size with him. We're going to see how he goes in the future. Catcher position was definitely, a weakness to this Mets season. Obviously, going on into the infield, starting off with first base, Pete Alonso. Obviously, Alonso with a phenomenal season. I mean, he had an all-star caliber season. Really a phenomenal season. 40 home runs, 131 RBIs, 271 average, 352 OBP, and an 870 OPS. I mean, those numbers are just phenomenal for Big Meat Pete. Obviously, he's going to the opposite way more, something that he really changed up his approach at the plate, going to the opposite field more. Really, his plate discipline has gotten so much better. Really has. His chase rate, he's gotten much better with the off-speed pitches. Hopefully, that is something he can continue to do in the next couple seasons. So, Alonso, if I'm going to grade this dude, I mean, he easily gets an A in my books. Moving over to second base, and it was good to see Jeff McNeil play majority of his time at second base. Jeff McNeil with obviously his best season of his career, in my opinion. McNeil obviously had an average of 326, winning the AL, not the AL, but the NL and the MLB batting title. So good to see Jeff McNeil show out the hustle there. Obviously posting a 382 OBP and an 836 OPS. So phenomenal numbers for Jeff McNeil. Obviously, like I said, won the batting title, was an all-star this season. Really phenomenal at second base defensively. I mean, he is a defensive wizard. Offensively, really, really had a phenomenal season. He got rid of that launch angle nonsense swing. We still saw some bits of it, but still he was getting on base, going to the opposite field, And that's what Jeff McNeil is known for. Bat-to-ball contact. He's not a power hitter. So phenomenal season from Jeff McNeil. Moving over to the shortstop position in Francisco Lindor, he really had a much better season compared to last season. His final stats, 270 average, 339 OBP, and a 788 OPS. 26 homers, 107 RBIs. Those are pretty, above average numbers in my opinion. I think, a lot of people do have this mentality of the $341 million and think, oh, I want to get, these crazy results, MVP caliber results. And, hopefully that will be the case for Lindor down the line. I think he had a much better season compared to last year, acclimating to New York, family issues, whatever it was. He really looked better, obviously tightening up his swing, got rid of that long, swing that was driving him crazy in 2021. Hopefully he can continue to really progress as his baseball athleticism into the next season. Overall, above average season defensively. He's a great defensive guy, Gold Glove finalist caliber player. Really no major complaints with Lindor. Definitely was a guy who was streaky. I mean, started off the season, April, May, really good. Had a couple, streaky moments in the second half. So hopefully he could continue to just stay consistent, keep that average around, 270. I mean, the home runs, the RBIs, the averages there. If you can get the OPS and the OBP up a little bit more, I think Lindor is definitely on set to have a really successful career with the Mets. Obviously, moving over to third base, it's Eduardo Escobar. And, with Escobar, he really struggled for a lot of the season. Obviously, a 240 average, 295 OBP, and a 725 OPS, 20 homers, 69 RBIs. Escobar really struggled this season. He really did. He just flat out looked horrible at the plate, lost, constantly gone into 0-2 counts. Obviously, you can't really work out of that if you're going to get into an 0-2 count every single at bat. Just swinging at all these crazy pitches in the dirt, getting on his knees, just looked lost at the plate completely. Defensively, nothing too crazy. I guess average guy at third base, decent arm, decent glove. He has Lindor next to him, so obviously you got some help there. But with Escobar, he really showed up in September. Obviously, he started off the season horrible. July, August, nothing really crazy. But September, the month of September was the month of Eduardo Escobar. Really showing up. I mean, we saw the power he was showing, the ability to go to the opposite field, the ability to pull the ball. And Escobar was responsible for, winning a lot of games in September for this New York Mets team. I mean, he was a big reason on why the Mets got to 101 wins. Obviously, he was the player of the month in September. But when it comes to it, a lot of Mets fans were aggravated with Eduardo Escobar. But you know what? I said in past streams and past videos, if Escobar could have a phenomenal second half in August and September and in the playoffs, every Met fan is going to forget how he was the 4 months prior. And, I think to the extent some Mets fans did forget that, I think it is going to be a question if he can be consistent. But September, 340 average, 393 BP, and a 649 slugging. 8 homers, 24 ribbies in 26 games. I mean, phenomenal numbers for Escobar in September. So, that's where you got to focus with Escobar on. And disappointing season to the extent, but he finished off strong. And, that is what I guess I do value when it comes to a player. Obviously, taking a look at some utility guys for the infield, Luis Guillorme, he was a great asset to this Mets ball team. Obviously, very versatile player. You threw him at second for some games, third, DH. Obviously was a decent role. Obviously, offensively, put up pretty good numbers, 273 average, 351 OBP, and a 691 OPS. Obviously, 297 at bats, so kind of a small sample size. Not really a power hitter, kind of an opposite field hitter, bat to ball type of guy, on base machine. So that's what you're going to take in a guy like Luis Guillorme. It was really good to see him get more of a role with this New York Mets team. Obviously, in 2021, you had Jonathan Villar kind of push Luis Guillorme to the side, and now he really got that number one utility spot, and we saw what he could do. So hopefully next season he could definitely show himself off more and definitely be a long-term guy for this Mets team. Obviously, the Mets did have a lot of prospects in terms of the infield, guys like Brett Beatty, guys like Mark Vientos, and you know what? They showed good light. They really did, helping out this team in the second half. Beatty, small sample size, got hurt, only played, a week or two. Looked decent, I guess. Obviously, defensively, nothing too crazy. Still is going to work on his defense in AAA, hopefully, or in spring training and in the offseason. Offensively, I mean, really is a gap-to-gap hitter, uses the field, has some good power. I think he could really be a nice bat down the line. Mark Vientos also called up kind of in desperation because of Eduardo Escobar being hurt for a little bit of the second half. Mark Vientos, like I say, I think just has to work on his plate discipline. I think that's going to be the number one thing, the strikeout numbers at the MLB level. So if he could work on that this offseason, maybe we'll be in the conversation of, can these two guys get up next season? So really interesting season for those guys. Moving into the outfield, obviously, Mark Canha had a pretty good season for the most part, especially a really good second half. He definitely was very streaky, had a little bit of a slump in the second half, obviously. Finished the season with a 266 average, a 367 OBP, and a 770 OPS. 13 homers, 61 ribbies, not horrible. I mean, he's more of your table center guy, and it was kind of hard because, he was moving all over the lineup. And I think that's kind of the role he is going to be for this New York Mets team, considering the depth. And they already have plenty of table setters, and whether that's Lindor, Nimmo, McNeil, those are your nice three table setters there. And obviously, you more so used Canha towards the end of this lineup, which I think was a pretty solid thing there. But overall with Canha, definitely had some streaky moments, obviously, where he was lost on the plate, just not making contact at all, fouling a lot of pitches off that were hittable, getting under the ball. But overall, I guess kind of finished off strong as well. Obviously, moving over to Brandon Nimmo. Nimmo had a, once again, pretty decent second half as well. Obviously, defensively, he made a lot of good defensive plays. There was that one memorable catch against the Dodgers where he robbed Justin Turner of the go-ahead home run. So obviously, his defense has increased so much more. Obviously, we've seen Nimmo really be more assertive in center field. His leg mechanics have gotten much better. Obviously, his ability to track down a ball. And obviously, he's playing more back. He's playing more towards the warning track. And he's being able to hustle in on those light, soft balls hit to center field. So he's able to make the catches. You just want to be concerned, cognizant of the injury. But overall, very impressive with Nimmo defensively. Offensively, he definitely changed his approach a little bit in the second half in this season. Started to chase a little bit more, which resulted in less walks, a little bit more strikeouts. I mean, still finished, with a decent average of 274, 367 OBP, and an 800 OPS. 16 homers, 64 ribbies. Not horrible numbers. I mean, really not. Like I said, he's he's known for walks. Did not walk a whole lot this season compared to the last couple years. Only 71 walks. That is the second most in his career. Obviously, he did play more games, so you have to take that into consideration. But Nimmo changed his approach a little bit, which I don't have an issue with that. But considering you're a leadoff guy, I do kind of value that walk ratio a little bit more. So, I mean, overall, a really impressive season from Brandon Nimmo. We're going to see how Nimmo continues to perform down the line. Obviously, moving over to the final outfield position, we have our friend Starling Marte, and he was really one of the big guys that the Mets struggled to deal without in the second half. Obviously, Marte had a phenomenal season, 292 average, a 347 OBP, and an 815 OPS. You look at the numbers, 16 homers, 63 ribbies. Those are great numbers, but the issue with Marte was when he got hurt in Pittsburgh. Obviously, he was hit by a pitch. He was sidelined for about a month and a half, and his absence really just killed the Mets. Like I said, we talk about table setters. Starling Marte is really one of the best table setters. Going into the season, they were saying, who should be the leadoff guy, Marte or Nimmo? Marte offers really great speed. Stolen bases were down. 18 stolen bases. That's good. He led the Mets in that. But considering he came off of, 53, 54 last year, you would have hoped you would have got more opportunities with that. But still an aggressive guy on the base paths, able to steal or able to get home on a double from first to home. So you like to see stuff like that. But yeah, the absence of Marte really missing really a lot of August and practically all of September really killed this team. And I say if there's one player's absence that affected this team, it was Marte. Having your table setter sidelined for that long just really killed this team. It really did. It shaked up this lineup. So it's unfortunate. Obviously, you had a couple other acquisitions, some trade deadline guys like Tyler Naquin. The trade deadline was definitely a disaster. We'll spend a little bit of time on that because we've talked about it plenty on this channel. Obviously, Tyler Naquin was brought in kind of to platoon as the DH role, Naquin and Ruff, lefty versus righty type situation along with Vogelbach. but they just did not succeed. Obviously, the first week or two, all three of these guys played phenomenal in a New York Mets uniform, but they just did not finish strong. Obviously, looking at Naquin's numbers with the Mets in 49 games, 203 average, 246 OBP, and a 636 OPS. Just lefty at bat who just couldn't really do much, just couldn't make much contact, struck out plenty. I mean, you look at Darren Ruff, another right-handed bat. Like I said, you try to, shake up the lefty versus righty versus the lefty versus righty pitcher on the mound. Darren Ruff also, by far, was, in my opinion, the worst trade deadline acquisition. Obviously, Darren Ruff, in 29 games, a 152 average, 216 OBP, and a 413 OPS. Literally did nothing. Obviously, zero power, drove in 7 runs, 5 walks, 20 strikeouts. It came to the point where the Mets were just saying, do you just cut this guy? Do you DFA him? There was no point in putting him in. Had plenty of times to avenge himself where he was in situations where he could have driven guys and just struck out or really did nothing productive. And along with Daniel Vogelbach, a guy that a lot of Mets fans hoped would bring some power to this team. Obviously, he's a pretty big guy, pretty strong guy as well. And a lot of Mets fans hope that he would have provided some power, behind Alonso and, the end of the meat of this order. And he really didn't. His numbers with the Mets at 255 average, 393 OBP, 829 OPS. So those numbers are a little bit better compared to the other two guys, providing 6 homers, 25 ribbies. But most interestingly, the walks, obviously 33 walks. And his chase rate and his plate approach really improved with the Mets, which was really something interesting in the second half that Vogelbach has not been known for. He's a power hitter, so you thought, wouldn't he want to swing the bat more? But he got on base plenty. I mean, you look at that OBP, 393 OBP, listen, you'll take it. Comes to the point where power was needed for this New York Mets team. We'll get into that more. Obviously, those are more so the position players. Obviously, this rotation, DeGrom, Scherzer, Bassett, Carrasco, Walker. Obviously, getting back Jacob DeGrom in August was huge. Played pretty decent. He really got into that final series against Atlanta where he just worn out and was not able to play well. And you look at the sample size of DeGrom in 11 games, 5-4, 3.08 ERA, 102 strikeouts, 0.75 WHIP, and 64 1/3 of an inning, short sample size. But overall, his velocity was there. His fastball and slider was there. Didn't really use the changeup a whole lot to the extent. Suffered with a little bit of barrels and some hard contact. But you know what? With DeGrom, he came back and he helped you win the games that was needed. Besides that Brave series, along with Max Scherzer, a guy who was plagued with injuries this season, definitely dealt with a lot. Obviously, you look at his final numbers, 11-5, 2.29 ERA, 173 strikeouts, and a 0.91 WHIP in 145 1/3 innings pitched. Scherzer, once again, another nice veteran in the back to back up DeGrom. Really knows his stuff. Has the 3 types of nasty sliders, the Gulf side, back foot door, high sliders. So really knew what he was doing. Mixes up his pitch as well. Also maybe just the guy who kind of got dead arm towards the end of the season. We saw he had that issue last year with the Dodgers in the postseason and just didn't show up in either the playoffs with the Padres and that last series against the Braves, but we'll dive into that. Obviously, the number 3 starter, Bassett, looked pretty decent, obviously. For most of the season, 15-9, 3.42 ERA, 167 strikeouts, a 1.14 WHIP, 182 innings pitched. Obviously Chris Bassett was really consistent when it came to his performance. Obviously made 30 starts, which is by far the most of any Mets starter. A very consistent guy in terms of health. I believe he didn't even probably miss 1 or 2 starts, nothing too crazy. But he looks good, obviously. He has a great arsenal of pitches. So he can mix those up really well. The fastball, the sinker, the slider, the changeup, etc. Obviously pitches really inside to lefties, which was a big strength of his this season. So he will be also another guy that the Mets will question this offseason. Obviously the number 4 and 5 starters were kind of mixed up between, a guy like Taijuan Walker, another guy that a lot of Mets fans did have, some issues with. He was, the inconsistencies in the second half definitely was a woe for Taijuan Walker, getting back to the high pitch count, Obviously, the last 3-4 years, he was plagued with injuries, so he didn't pitch a whole lot when he was in Toronto, when he was with Seattle. And this was really his first season where he kind of was healthy for the most part. 12-5, 3.49 ERA, 132 strikeouts, 1.19 whip, 157 and 1/3 innings pitched. So yeah, obviously with Taijuan Walker, like I said, changeup looked nice. Obviously, he started to use that splitter slider pitch, resulting in a lot of strikeouts. His ground ball ratio went up. The barrels went down. A lot of Mets fans gave him stuff, obviously, for a couple bad outings. But once again, also did really help carry this rotation when guys like DeGrom and Scherzer were absent. And obviously, the final guy in the rotation is Carlos Cookie Carrasco. Obviously, Carrasco, once again, also love-hate relationship with some Met fans. 15-7 on the season, 3.97 ERA, 152 strikeouts, a 1.33 whip, 152 innings pitched. So yeah, obviously Carrasco made 29 starts. So when it came to the consistencies of health, that definitely was on his side. With Carlos Carrasco, he really did have an interesting season. Also another guy, I think you could say this whole rotation itself had inconsistencies. I think like all rotations, but for the most part, Carrasco is just one of those guys that I think Mets fans do just have a love-hate relationship with. Really, going into the season, he was of question. The first inning complexities were completely gone. I just think the thing with Carrasco was the long ball definitely got the best of him to the extent. But otherwise, for his 35-year-old, for that season, didn't do horrible. Obviously, his chase rate was fair. His curveball looked nice. Didn't walk many guys. Plenty of whiffs. But like I said, the barrels, the hard contact, the XBA, not the best with Carrasco. That's the rotation. Spending a brief time on the bullpen, guys like David Peterson really helped out this team a lot. Nice lefty to the Mets rotation in the second half. We know going into the second half, the Mets were saying, are you going to put a guy like Peterson, a guy like McGill into the bullpen and use them as the lefty, considering they had so much of a shortage of left-handed pitching? And that's kind of what they did. Peterson definitely made a couple of starts in the rotation, but small sample size, obviously. He played in 28 games, started 19 of those, 105 and 2/3 innings pitched, 3.83 ERA, 1.33 whip. I think the only concern with Peterson in the second half with putting him in the bullpen was the walks. And obviously there's less room for error as a bullpen guy with walks, but he didn't really struggle with that so much. So really tip of the cap to Peterson. Obviously 7 W's on the season. So, I read something where it was like in 19 games he's played, he won 11 of them for the Mets. So that was huge. 11 wins for the Mets is huge. It's better than seeing past years, putting in, random AAA guys, like your Corey Oswalt, your Chris Flexen. So that's huge. Tyler McGill, another stressful guy, high expectations, injured, plagued with injuries, really didn't play any bit of a season, only really 9 games played. Put in the bullpen, got lit up. Probably we're going to see how things go with him in spring training. Not much to say with him. Like I said, the bullpen, you got guys like Seth Lugo, Adam Ottavino, Trevor Williams, Yohan Lopez, Michael Givens, Tommy Hunter. They held down the fort to the extent. The bullpen was definitely streaky, had its moments. They definitely finished off strong. Guys like Lugo were able to turn it around. Adam Ottavino had a really phenomenal season. His slider's nasty. But I think most importantly, if we're talking about one guy, it's the narco guy, and that is Edwin Diaz. Everyone loves narco. Obviously, Diaz by far his best season of his career. 3-1, 1.31 ERA, 62 innings pitched, 118 strikeouts, 0.84 whip, 32 saves. This dude looked phenomenal, completely changed up his mechanics. The chase rate, the swinging and misses were phenomenal. His slider was being thrown hard. His fastball was being thrown hard. The velo was there. He just was practically unhittable. Really unhittable. For the most part, there's not much to say with Diaz. He did his job. Expectations were there, and he boosted morale in New York. Obviously, narco is something that will be in my heart forever. So yeah, obviously that is a little bit of a player analysis. But in terms of really what went wrong for this New York Mets team, you look at it, 101 games won, 61 losses. You think to yourself, why would any Met fan be upset with that? And I think the most simple reason is the Mets had plenty of opportunities to easily win this division. By far, I think most of us know by now the Mets did not win the division. They won the wild card and lost to the Padres 1-2 in that wild card series. But really, people say, well, what happened with the Mets? They didn't collapse, obviously. That was not a collapse. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, the Mets collapsed. No, you look at a collapse, you look at 2021. You look at a collapse for this year, it's the Milwaukee Brewers. 6 games over the Cardinals in July. Boom, completely collapsed in the second half, missed the playoffs. The Mets made the playoffs, won 101 games. I look at it like last year, the 2021 NL West, Dodgers and Giants in 2021. It was 107 and 106 wins between both of those teams. 1 game apart. Does that mean the Dodgers collapsed? If anything, the Dodgers beat the Giants in the NLDS. So, listen, I don't want to say the Mets collapsed. I think they definitely let down at a lot of times where they easily could have won games. For example, that Cubs series in the second half, when the Mets got swept by the Chicago Cubs at home, that was really a punch in the throat for the Mets. That was really a big reason of, when the Mets kind of, could have easily taken those games. You look at that series against the Nationals in pretty much the end of August where they lost 2 of 3. Those are games that, if you won one more game, you would have won the division. Straight up. Everyone says, oh, games in April don't count. If you won, let's see. If you won the game on September 14th where the Cubs beat the Mets 6-3, boom, you would have won the division. If you won the game on, I don't know, let's see, July 22nd, where you lost 4-1 against the Padres, boom, you would have won the division. It's baseball. It really is. That's, how stuff works. It's unfortunate that, one game practically determined, the Mets' overall title for the end of the season. But you know what? At the end of the day, that's baseball. That's how it works. I think this Mets team definitely had its great moments. And, a lot of us said, regardless of how this team finishes off in the end, this was by far a miracle season. I mean, the comebacks we've seen, the amazing moments, the walk-offs, the great plays, everything. This was by far a great season. I am unbelievably excited for next season. Unfortunately, things didn't work out well in the wild card. We'll talk about that a little bit briefly. Going into this, everyone was saying, oh, it's going to be crazy seeing that Mets 1-2-3 punch in the postseason. Yeah, that definitely was not a good 1-2-3 punch. Obviously, by far, let the Mets down. Obviously, in Game 1, we saw the Mets lost that 6-1. Or my apologies, 7-1. Max Scherzer did not have his stuff simply by far. Left after 4 2/3 of an inning. Struggled with the long ball. Got booed. Never would have thought. Just did not have his stuff. Got lit up. You look at Game 2. The Mets won that 7-3. Obviously, our friend Jacob deGrom was on the mound. He did what he needed to do. The offense showed up and backed him up. We got some power production. We got some contact from the guys that needed to. And then you came down to Game 3, and the Mets lost Game 3 7-1. Musgrove was practically unhittable. Bassett, by far, another really miserable start. And like I said, really what went wrong with the Mets in the playoffs was the inconsistencies offensively. And I think by saying that was really kind of the issue for the Mets in the second half, was the inconsistencies offensively. They were very streaky. They had a week where they would be typical like 2 for 13 with runners in scoring position, but then next week, boom, their offense was there. Their power was there. So we talk about 3 things that kind of killed the Mets in the second half, was really what killed them in the wild card. The inconsistencies offensively, the lack of power production, and, a lot of people do like to blame Billy Epler for the trade deadline, and I think you have the right to. He was trying to be, kind of 2015 style, trying to show off, that Juan Uribe, Cespedes type move. Didn't work out for them. Obviously, it worked out for the first week, but for the rest of the season, it didn't. But yeah, I mean, that's really in regards to what went wrong, what happened, the good, the bad, and the ugly for the Mets in the second half, the good, the bad, and the ugly for the 3 games in the postseason. Obviously, that is that. Just wanted to come on here, kind of rant off for, 25, 30 minutes, quick, nice little video in regards to the second half. Just a little bit of a player analysis, kind of deep diving into players, particularly a little bit of, kind of what went wrong with the whole team. Obviously, Buck Showalter had a couple of moments, with bullpen management, kind of being messed up, cost the Mets a couple games. But by far, what he did with this team has been crazy to think about. I mean, he took a team that had clubhouse animosity and really turned this team around from last year. So I think obviously the Mets are on a good note with, Buck Showalter, Steve Cohen, Billy Epler. and the team they have built around them. And, of course, the young guys down who should be debuting soon and in the farm system and all around. So, yeah, so kind of just wanted to come on here. Nice little video. Not really professional, kind of just speak my opinion, rant off as it is, not reading off of anything besides the stats, and just going over the 2022 New York Mets season. So that's the end of this video. I really do appreciate everyone for tuning in. If anyone has any comments, questions, concerns, any thoughts, if they want to, if anyone wants to rant off about the Mets 2022 season in the second half, you could talk about the first half, whatever floats your boat. Drop it down below. Please, if you can, give this video a like, comment, subscribe, all of that great stuff. Turn on the notification bell. Definitely going to be plenty of off-season videos, free agent predictions, all of that great stuff. How the Mets could address this, maybe their catcher position, their DH position, little stuff like that. So, yeah, otherwise, I appreciate everyone for tuning in. Till next time, baseball fans, see ya. LFGM.